All right, welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran, and you guys know I usually do this show solo. But every now and then I have a guest, and so if I do have a guest, that's how you know it's a good guest. So joining me now is Griffin Prock, who is the host of his own podcast show about sports, which is such an on-the-nose title, Griff. I just like, it's like, what's this show about? It's about sports, so I love that. When people hear mine, like, it could be anything, so it might be about conspiracy theories, which it kind of sometimes is. But Griffin, man, how are you on this fine Saturday evening?
I'm doing good, Omar. Thank you for having me on. I'm glad that I had you on my podcast as well. Can't wait to have you back. That's how we're connected through threads and everything. And yeah, show about sports. When I was coming up with the name, I just was like, I work in e-commerce. I'm looking at a lot of SEO optimizations, and I'm like, if people are going to look for a show about sports, what are they going to type in? Show about sports. And so I
Right,
thought
right.
I'm just going to rank really high if people start typing that in. And so that was kind of the thought process, because as you know, I really focus on football and basketball. So it's a little misleading if hockey fans show up and they're like, where's the hockey content?
God, man, you talk about SEO. It's just kind of funny how that has been made into such a big factor, right? In the way that we kind of have to phrase things, present things like, oh, is this a trending topic on Google? That sort of thing. It's just kind of the reality of the world we live in. But we're not here to talk about SEO today. Maybe another time, Griff. Now that I know you work in e-commerce, but we are going to talk about quarterbacks. So in past episodes, I find the quarterback position incredibly interesting. Right, it's the most important position in sports by a mile, or at least American sports, if you want to, exclude soccer and stuff like that. But it's just something that, like, it used to be quarterback, point guard, catcher. But I feel like the point guard and the catcher have been lapped by the quarterback just because the rules have changed so much and everything is centered around it, around the quarterback. They're touching the ball every single offensive play. So it's incredibly important. And I notice I follow Griff on Threads, and as you mentioned, that's where we initially connected. So I see him posting about some of these QBs as well in the NFL. So kind of want to talk about that, talk a little bit about rookie QBs, talk a little bit about guys coming in from the collegiate ranks this year. The college football playoff right around the corner, so we'll maybe get into that a little bit as well. So, but Griff, let's start with the rookies. This was supposed to be this awesome class, right? You had Caleb Williams, generational talent. Jaden Daniels not too far behind him. In the pre-draft analysis, Drake May, arm talent through the roof. Michael Penix, great arm talent as well. J.J. McCarthy, national champion. Bo Nix played a million years in college, at Auburn and Oregon, and now he's in the NFL as well. So I guess when you're looking at, as we're kind of closing in on the playoffs, what are your impressions of these guys? Obviously, we'll exclude McCarthy because he's been injured, and Penix because he's been behind Kirk Cousins. So talk about Nix, Williams, Daniels, and May. What have your impressions been about these guys?
Yeah, so like you said, there was a lot of hype going into it. And what's hard about hype in everything in these classes is you are the only class to compare it to. We like to forget the past a little bit. We forget about those Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis era. We now look forward and we get a little bit too excited about the next class. So people can start to falter on their expectations. And overall, I've been impressed by every single quarterback in some respect. When you look at Caleb Williams, we know the dysfunction there in the Bears system. There's not much he's going to be able to do. He's still trying to play hero ball, and he kind of has to behind that offensive line. We've seen enough good things from him that I'm excited to see where it goes. If they can just get a little bit more stability and maybe a team that has better personalities that might fit with Caleb Williams on that side in coaching and on the players. Jane Daniels, electric out the gate, but his size and frame and getting a little banged up is now becoming a little bit of a concern. You can tell he's kind of seeing ghosts is the wrong word, but he's not as he was. Because I mean, you get hit in the ribs enough time as a leaner guy, I would know it just hurts. You know what I mean? You don't want that. And so Jane Daniels is kind of falling off that bandwagon, and that bandwagon was MVP. He's an MVP. Like,
Yeah.
let's calm down. He was great, but to hold him to that standard, you're letting yourself down now that you look at him at this point. And then you look around, obviously, when we talk about Nix, I mean, we get really excited about Bo Nix because he's turning Denver around. Russell Wilson wasn't going to work with Sean Payton. Those personalities don't work. Bo Nix and Sean Payton, I love it. I see the sideline. I can just tell they're both fired up about football. It's awesome. And Denver fans, you got to just be happy with what you have back there. Even though it's not the most electric of the bunch, it might be the most consistent of the class right now. And then last but not least, May. It's the Patriots, it was going to be a work in progress. We saw a lot of Jacoby. But then when you see a little bit of May, they're losing games, but he's not losing them these games. There's a lot of other things going on. So overall, I like what I've seen from this rookie class.
Yeah, I think Caleb, a lot of people were talking about Chicago in the playoffs and all that. And I'm just like, I just didn't buy it because the organization has so much dysfunction. And like historically, their ownership just hasn't been great. And then you look at Daniels, I think, there's a term that they use in the NBA a lot, but I think it applies here, is the rookie wall. Guys playing college in the NBA and they're playing 40 games. So once they get halfway through that NBA season, they kind of start struggling. Same thing here. College, you play 12 games, 13 games, give or take, playoff or a bowl game. So now Jaden's at that wall, right? He has to, and obviously the durability is a concern with the body type and everything. And Drake May, I think, New England, they're going to lose a bunch of games. They're going to have a top 5 pick, but the talent's there, right? There's no debating that. I find the Bo Nix one the most interesting because we always like to say how great we did on an evaluation, but we also have to acknowledge when we were wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So while I could say I saw what Lamar Jackson would be, which I did think that he was going to be great, and everybody laughed at me. I didn't think Bo Nix was going to be good. I was like, this guy feels like a backup, like when I was watching him at Oregon. And he's been great. And he has this reputation, like you mentioned it, the whole dink and dunk game manager type thing. But he's pushed it down the field a bit here, and it's been really surprising, to see how much he's really acclimated. Sean Payton really treating him like a veteran, which probably is because of that college experience. But I've been super impressed with him. I think he's been tremendous, and whole body of work. I feel like he's been the best so far this year in a vacuum. Which leads me to my next point to you is, if you were to rank the 4 guys based on who has impressed you the most, how would that ranking go for you?
So it's really interesting because I'm with you on Knicks in terms of, like I was saying, consistency. Like, he has just brought this team, but we can't discount what that defense is doing for him. That is
True,
a top
yeah.
3 defense there in Denver. But then when you look at Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, they don't really have a defense, or they had a defense that we were comparing to the Falcons and other defenses where we're like, if their offense can pull them forward, they're gonna be able to do some things. So I'm still gonna put Jaden Daniels above because I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment. Obviously, with everything, the Commanders are still in the playoff hunt just because they've lost 2 or 3 straight now at this point, and it hasn't looked the best. That was Bo Nix at the beginning of the year. So there's walls at different periods of time for different players, I think. So I'm going Jaden Daniels 1, Nix number 2 for sure. And then we go down and we talk about Caleb Williams 3 and May 4 for me, because I just think Williams has the more upside than May, even though if we look back 2 years, May was supposed to be the number 1 quarterback in this class if we look back on reports out of North Carolina. And he definitely has the ability to, but when we look at situations, I don't know if we're ever going to see that out of Drake May, or at least not in these first few years, because the Patriots need to do a lot of work. The Bears, like everyone was saying, they're kind of playoff-y bound if they can just get a few more things right.
Yeah, the Bears have the unfortunate situation of playing in the best division in the NFL.
That too.
You got a one-loss team that is just fending off the second place team. That's just the craziest thing about it. So you could argue the 2 best teams in the NFC, or at least 2 of the best 3 in the NFC, are in the same division with Detroit and Minnesota. So speaking of Minnesota, we didn't really touch on Penix and J.J. McCarthy. So Penix, obviously there's been a lot of rumbling about him getting the start in Atlanta. Kirk Cousins with a horrendous game this past week, 4 interceptions, no TDs. You kind of wonder if he kind of falls on his face this weekend, if the pressure ramps up to give Penix a go. So I guess, when do you think we'll be able, and then on Minnesota, McCarthy, like, Darnold's playing out of his mind. Like, he's been playing really good. And they bring in Daniel Jones as a backup for the playoff run. And so when are these guys going to see the field?
Oh, it's such a good question. And anybody could say anything, and I'd probably believe them, because that's how it kind of feels. It feels like 1 or 2 things could happen, and we would see these guys. Let's talk about the Falcons for a second. It kind of is comparison to the Browns. It's just not as ugly. You paid Kirk Cousins a lot of money. You got to play him. He has been all right this year. Again, we're really good at being prisoners of the moment. We see one bad pick from Kirk Cousins and we're like, get that old man out of here. Let's see Penix. But let's remember, Penix is an old man in his own right when we're talking about the rookie quarterbacks.
Right.
And so I like Penix. I watched a lot of him, unfortunately, because he was in the Pac-12 with my Cougs. So he has the talent. That's not the problem. The problem is that as an ownership group, as a coach, you just can't put a rookie out there. And I think it's going to pay off, kind of like the Jordan Love taking over for Rodgers scenario. You just have to let the old horse run a little bit longer and see what that is, unless things completely fall off. And they just haven't in Atlanta. So there's no reason to do that, because if anybody in Atlanta is being realistic, Super Bowl is fun to think about, but I don't think anybody seriously was like, oh, Kirk Cousins here now with this defense and this weapons. We don't know if they're good or not. We just need to see if we have a quarterback that can finally throw to one in a coaching staff. I think a good wild card divisional round kind of exit would be a successful season, just like the Seahawks. I'm not trying to be biased. I'm in the same boat with that. And then when we head over, obviously, to Minnesota, oh man, it's kind of like Kirk Cousins. I mean, Kirk Cousins and the Vikings went, I can't remember the record, but they won like 13, 14, 15 games. Yeah. And it looked incredible, and then they fell on their face in the playoffs. We could see the exact same thing here with Sam Darnold and the Vikings, because they're that good. They have a great defense. They have the weapons. But Sam Darnold, we know his ceiling. Is his ceiling holding a Lombardi trophy at the end of the year? Well, I don't know. But is J.J. McCarthy's? I don't know either, because he was kind of the Bo Nix tier. It kind of stopped at Drake May, and then when we got to J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix, we were like, could be upside, could be game managers. We don't know what they are. So we'll just draft them and see. Now, he's coming off of an injury, so that's going to really determine things. And I know that he had a second procedure on his knee, which isn't going to take back the time, but I guess it's a little complication, if you will. I'm not a doctor, but I hear a second surgery and I don't get super excited about it. So I think J.J. McCarthy next year, maybe middle of the year, say Darnold falls flat in the playoffs. And again, falls flat is different than them losing. Like, he just looks bad. And then with Penix, I mean, it's anybody's guess there.
With the Penix thing, I think what a lot of people, they've kind of connected a couple of dots with it. They're looking at, okay, Cousins can't really move. Now, Mike Penix has had a lot of injuries himself, right? And he's not necessarily a mobile quarterback that he was when he was at Indiana, but he is mobile enough. And with him, you're talking about the rocket balls, right? And when you see like how much Rome Odunze has struggled, how much Jalen Polk has struggled in the NFL, his receivers at Washington, people start to think like, well, maybe he carried them a little bit, right? And you got guys like Pitts and Drake London and these guys, this receiving talent, Bijan Robinson coming out of the backfield, and you start to wonder, it's like, man, if we get this big arm dude here, you start to fantasize about it, right? It's just like, so I think there's going to be pressure there, especially, they're in the middle of a division race, Atlanta, with Tampa Bay. And to a lesser extent, New Orleans, obviously. But mostly it's a Tampa Bay and Atlanta situation there. And I think that if he starts losing some games, there's going to be some pressure to get him out by the offseason, and it might not be prudent, but it might be the way, yeah.
Exactly, and I'm not trying to dig Penix at all, because I think he is an NFL-level quarterback. But you brought up a really good point about what he was able to do and maybe carry those wide receivers. They had a top 5 offensive line last year.
True.
2 of them got drafted in the first round this year, and they're doing great on their respective teams. So you have to think about that. Because now if you go look at Ryan Grubb's system, the offensive coordinator that's in Seattle, both you and I know that very well, the system's not working well when the offensive line's not well. So if you go back and watch some Washington tape, he had so much time in the pocket, and you just don't have that in the NFL. So can Penix get it off in time? Is there a system in place for him to let it go? Because that's what's kept Kirk Cousins in the league. He's never been mobile, even before the injury. He just knows how to get the ball out on time and move within a pocket. Penix, unfortunately, has a lot of injuries and doesn't like to move too much. So you can get excited, but again, with quarterbacks, there's expectations, and you got to just hold yourself to some, or you might go a little bit crazy mentally about what's the upside.
Griff, the sign of a great guest is when they say things that set you up for your next question.
There we go.
And so you brought up the Seahawks, you brought up Geno, you brought up Sam Darnold, we brought up Tampa Bay, which means we also brought up Baker Mayfield, and that's my next thing. So, we talked a little bit earlier. All these teams, they always want to draft the next guy. But we're seeing these teams here have success with these retreads, right? Geno, on his 3rd or 4th team, they're leading the division heading into a huge game against Arizona tomorrow. Baker in a division race in the South there with Atlanta to make the playoffs. Sam Darnold having one of the best records there on his 4th team, I think. And it's just like, is that a path that people should consider? Like if somebody has the measurables and you get them kind of cheap, you get a nice young defense or whatever. Like you look at what they're not winning a bunch of games. Or you look what Jameis Winston has done in Cleveland, and like I hypothesized after like seeing the Denver game, and it's like yeah, obviously through the pick sixes. He also set a franchise record in yards and had his team in the position to win the game. You wonder, like, man, if they went to him earlier, are they maybe in the playoff hunt? Like you just kind of wonder. So, is this something where you think you trust your talent evaluation to be able to say, I see the talent this guy has. I think my system can fix it like Seattle did with Geno, like Minnesota did with Darnold, like Tampa had done with Baker. Do you think that that's an avenue for a QB hungry team? Say a team like the New York Giants, right? They're going to be in the market for a QB. Is it just a preconceived notion they're just going to draft Cam Ward or Shador Sanders, or should they kind of consider a guy who was maybe drafted a few years ago and think that they could reclaim this guy because they have faith in their offensive system?
It's such a good question. And it really comes down to you have to think about what is that class of quarterback going to be? Because if you think about Geno on the block, you think about Darnold on the block, Baker Mayfield, you get a little bit excited, if you will. But then if you think about this crop of quarterbacks, who is that right now? Daniel Jones, maybe Mac Jones, Bryce Young. You think of guys that like maybe even Tua and Trevor Lawrence down the line if we're thinking of like
Anthony Richardson, probably.
Yeah, Anthony Richardson. Yeah. Like right now, it doesn't feel very exciting in the list because I don't even want to use Trevor and Tua because they've already been paid. I don't see them moving off of the now. But those other guys that haven't been paid.
Like a Will Levis, eventually,
yeah,
maybe.
You already know what it is. So it's almost like everybody's scared of the unknown in life. But as an organization in football, you're kind of excited about the unknown as in a new prospect. That's up to your talent evaluators to find out, though, because I know we're going to get into it in a little bit about these prospects. But this year, we have to temper our expectations. This is not last year's class. It's a very perplexing class. Everything's going to be a risk when we talk about quarterbacks, is essentially what I'm setting myself up for there. And so, I don't know. But you know what the other guys have. They have experience. They know the game. So you find that bridge versus carry you. But if you look at all of those quarterbacks that you just mentioned that have been that bridge quarterback that have succeeded a little bit more, there is a ceiling, though. It's not multiple rounds in the playoffs. It's not every team that we like. I think Jared Goff might be the only one that we're like, yeah, he can take them to a Super Bowl there in Detroit. But you look at everywhere else, and once we go over like top 5 quarterbacks, they were all drafted by their team, So sometimes that's the best route. And I think we're just kind of in an era of we discredited the backup QB for a while, or the quarterback, we gave up on him too quick. And now look at us. These guys do have moments. And again, one team can win it in the end, different levels of success, but I don't know if I'm all in on this whole, let's just go try Bryce Young out if he's on the market, and go from there.
Yeah, you end up with a situation where it's like, if I want to make the playoffs, like if say I'm on the Raiders, right? Maybe I get a Daniel Jones because I just want to win some games, right? Or, maybe like you think about like Derek Carr when he went to New Orleans. Like that was New Orleans obviously was in cap hell, and still in cap hell. But, they're like, well, we want to win now, so we're going to get a guy who could win right now. And the problem is you'll win now, but you won't win a Super Bowl now. Like, listen, my girlfriend's big Seahawks fan, right? I have been like on record with her trying to convince her that Geno is actually good. She hates him, right? And a game a couple weeks ago where he had those 2 red zone picks. I think it was against the Rams.
I think it was.
That ended up going to OT and they lost. Yeah. And I was just like, I'm done. Like this is the limitation. Like guys like Geno, they give you like every few plays they'll like make some seam route, and you're just like, man, if this guy could just put it together, right? But then at a certain point, like you've been the starter now for a few years, and you paid Geno at this point. And you start to wonder, like I kind of wanted them to draft Penix, if the Falcons didn't, because I felt like that would have been a perfect situation. You learn from a guy in Geno who excelled at the college game as well, and there's some similarity there, and and then you brought in Ryan Grubb, so it would have been his coordinator, but obviously it didn't happen that way. But it's just kind of like an interesting thing, like you see it in the NBA all the time. Like these teams were just like the Chicago Bulls, right? It's the Bulls strategy, which is we're gonna be just good enough to make the play-in. But not bad enough to be able to win the lottery, and in the NFL, it's all about the QB. It's all about getting the right QB. So if you see someone who's there, I feel like you got to draft him, which is what the Bears did and what the Commanders did. So let's talk about those college QBs, though. You mentioned it's an interesting class. I couldn't agree more. Shador Sanders is probably the top one, I would say. Cam Ward, former Washington State quarterback Cam Ward. And I do have to, I'm going to take a little bit of a victory lap on Cam Ward here, real quick. I remember where he was a freshman. I was living in Detroit at the time. He was a freshman at Washington State, and they had some late Pac-12 game come on. They played like Oregon State or something, and I'm watching this guy. He's like running around, making things happen. They didn't have the elite talent at Washington State that they have at other programs. I was like, this guy's good, and I'm watching. I was like, this feels like an NFL guy when he's like a freshman, sophomore, and he just is incredibly. His game is smooth, and I love watching Cam Ward. That defense is very interesting in Miami, but but yeah, so he's one of them. You probably also got Nessmeyer if he decides to declare. Jalen Milroe might be there. Jackson Dart, Ole Miss. These are the type of guys you're looking at. So it's really those top two guys. But then you got a few other ones after that. Carson Beck with Georgia, who we watched earlier. Dylan Gabriel, if he decides to come out, or if he even gets drafted, I should say. I'm pretty sure he's a senior this year. So, those are the type of names that you're working with in the draft this year. So, do any of them stick out to you as like, you know what, this could be a guy who could turn the franchise?
Great question, because here's what's going to happen. These guys are going to get overdrafted. And when I say that, it's just going to be
Happens every time.
earlier. Every time. It's just the way it is. The team's going to move up. We're going to see a lot of people move into position to take a guy, and that's going to be the downfall. Is everyone's going to see 1 through 3 maybe are taken in the first 10 picks, and we're going to be like, oh, okay, so these guys are franchise-altering players. Unfortunately, I don't think there is any franchise-altering players. If I had to pick an upside guy, I'm going with Cam Ward, just because of his physical build versus Shador. I like Shador as well, but there's a little bit of concerns. He's not as athletic as you would want him to be. Cam Ward is that sneaky athletic where it's not like Lamar Jackson, but he does it in the same way where he just like breaks a tackle and you're like, why was that so nonchalant the way he just did that, Because I've been watching Cam Ward, like you said, for a long time now, and I knew that he had that, but that's some of his downside. He plays a little hero ball. He likes to get out of the system. He thinks he can make every throw. So it is a risk. He's going to make some bad throws. And you're going to be like, that's the first quarterback off the board. But then you look at everybody else. You look at Carson Beck now has an injury. I mean, it's great that we're recording this right now, I guess, but his already was having a tough season. Now he has a UCL. It could be like a Brock Purdy kind of situation would be my guess. I'm just speculating there. And then you have Quinn Ewers a little bit older, Garrett Nussmeier. You like him, but you don't love him. Jalen Milroe, he's that perfect mix of just that dual threat quarterback, but it's not like Heisman level, like Lamar Jackson. So you're like, okay, well, I don't know if I love it. I love it on certain days, but I don't love it on every day. So I'm going to go Cam Ward. He's my number one quarterback. And when I say number one quarterback, that does not mean number one guy off the board. It just means number one quarterback that I think can maybe make a franchise a little bit different if I'm the Giants or the Raiders, for example. But nah, I can't say that about everybody else, though.
Let's say the Giants have the number one pick. If you're Joe Shane, assuming he still has a job after this season. The Hard Knocks, I'm a Giants fan, you know this, Griff. The Hard Knocks was a bad look, because, I don't know if you watched the offseason Hard Knocks with them. I was texting a friend of mine, I was like, these guys are idiots. And I was like, this, what I said to him was exactly this. I'm like, watching this makes me believe that we could work in a front office in the NFL and be just fine. Because some of the stuff they were saying and doing, I was like, that's just bad relationship management, like the whole Saquon thing, who we'll get to in a second here. But, if you're them, let's say they don't win the game the rest of the way and they happen to get the number one pick. Do you just say, fuck it, draft Travis Hunter? Or do you go elsewhere?
Ooh, I mean, you're in such an interesting spot in New York. It's like one of one specific. It's kind of like the Raiders, too. You just have to draft a quarterback. I mean, you've been doing this little dance where it's like the Daniel Jones for a while. You've tried out Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito and whoever's back there, everyone. And then you look at the Raiders, it's the same thing. They're just trying everybody who's on sale, and it's been fun, but let's just take a risk. You take a shot. You need a quarterback. It would be nice to go get a Travis Hunter. It would be nice to go get one of the multiple defensive guys from Michigan. It would be nice to go get an offensive lineman from Georgia or from Texas, but unfortunately, I think you just have to be smart with there, but that doesn't mean you have to start them. Just go get a guy. If you think he's a round one projection, go get him. You might even be able to maneuver and get another first round pick with another team in trade. So if I'm the Giants and I'm number one, I'm looking at Cam Ward personally, but I wouldn't be mad if they took Shador as well.
Shador is so interesting to me. Obviously, everybody is there. A lot of people don't like Shador because they don't like Dion, right? But when you watch him, every single throw he can make it. My problem with Shador is he holds onto the ball too long. So in a way, he's kind of like Cam Ward because he's not saying, okay, this play is dead, nothing's happening, let me just get rid of the ball. He's going to hold on to it, so he takes a lot of sacks because he doesn't have that mobility that Cam has, whereas Cam's going to go off platform and do some stuff. So the Giants, I don't know if you know this, Griff. The Giants have started a black QB one time in the franchise 100-year history. And it happened a few years ago when they started Geno Smith for one game. That was the only time they've ever started a black QB. So, well, actually, no, I'm sorry. Up until then, they had a couple Tyrod Taylor games as well.
Yeah, I was about to say, I thought you
yeah.
were going to say Tyrod.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so Tyrod and Geno were the only black QBs to ever start a game at QB for the Giants. So, I have I always joke, like, they're like, oh, yeah, Cam Ward to the Giants. I was like, I don't know, man. He's not white. And that's just the way that they've operated. Like, they just, that's who they draft, right? And so, like, I, again, been saying people like, oh, man, Cam Ward looked good, or Shador looked good. Maybe the Giants can get him. I was like, they're going to reach and draft Jackson Dart. That's what's going to happen. And who I am not high on at all. I don't think he's going to be a good pro. But if they end up with Shador or Cam, I think, you just kind of say, okay, cool. We got our guy. Let's figure it out. The good thing if they keep Dayball is he showed with how limited Daniel Jones is, he could squeeze every bit of talent out of a QB. He could kind of scheme some stuff up. So I think that would be a good move for them. I just wonder if they maybe just go safe and go for like an offensive lineman. But speaking on the guys, I think it's two guys, right? You mentioned them. It's Shador and it's Cam, and we don't even think they're that great. But I think those are the two that you're going to be looking at as guys who can start and be good starters in the league for a number of years. If they're getting the right situation, maybe good things happen for them. I don't know what that situation would have to be. I honestly think, like, if the Rams kind of bottom out here and they are in a position for a top 10 pick and they could get like a Cam Ward because people aren't high on the QB eval, and then let him learn under somebody like Matthew Stafford who's been through it all as a QB. I think that could be an interesting team to monitor because they're probably starting to think about the future a little bit. Sean McVay likes to have that personal relationship with his QB and a partnership, and there's a vacuum right now in the West. So, yeah.
It's really interesting that you bring that up because it's not just the bad teams that need quarterbacks that are going to be picking high. It's teams like the Jaguars that have Trevor Lawrence are going to have a top 5 pick. So maybe if you're a team like the Rams, you could even talk the Seahawks. You could even talk, say the 49ers want to move on from Brock Purdy. We could go anyway with this middle of like, where are we with our quarterback situation? They could trade assets to get up. I don't know what the Rams asset allocation looks right now since they traded all of them away to go get that Super Bowl, but I mean, I wouldn't write that off either, but I also wouldn't write off the Rams just in general this year. I was talking on my podcast last week. They're always going to be in the mix. I'm sorry that Sean McVay doesn't know how to lose, / he doesn't want to lose, even if his owner's telling him to lose. So I wouldn't write that off. But again, if you could go get any of these quarterbacks, Shador or Cam Ward, in the right position, I think they can be very successful in the NFL. I want to make that clear. They are NFL level talent, but are they life altering of your franchise? I just don't know yet. And if I had to guess, I'm going to go with Cam Ward.
Yeah, I like Cam as well. I think in today's game, we'll get to this later, you have to have mobility to succeed. You look at the guys who are doing things like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. These guys could all move. They might not move as much as some people think that they should, but they do. They when they need it, they could do it, and that's the big thing. Let's talk a little about the MVP. I think I was listening to your show, and you were doing like power rankings for the teams, and you guys were talking about the Eagles, and it was kind of talking about like the Saquon MVP thing, and so I posted a thread about this I think a little while ago, and it was just kind of like my journey into being a Giants fan was interesting because I wasn't brought up by a football fan. My dad's an immigrant from the Middle East, so he didn't really like football. My mom didn't really watch that much football back then. She's a Lions fan now, but she doesn't really didn't really watch it back then. And so I had to kind of pick and choose, right? So like I got into basketball first. That's why I always loved the Knicks more than anyone else because that was my very first team, right? When I got into football, it was, living in the New York City area, it was either Giants or Jets. But also there was a decent contingent of Eagles fans, Philly pretty close by. And I came really close to being a fan of either the Jets or the Eagles. It ended up being the Giants. And so when Saquon left for the Eagles, I didn't really take it as bad as some Giants fans did. A lot of people calling him like Benedict Barkley. That's like a comment I got on the thread a while ago. And I'm just like, look, he went to college at Penn State. He's from the metro New York area, New Jersey area. So, Philly's pretty close for family reasons. I get it. He gets to stay in the same region. He goes to a team that's actually trying to win games, that has a good roster build and all that. So he gets the money, of course. Yeah, I think he would have stayed in New York if the money
Total,
was the money.
100%.
Yeah, but he's been incredible this year. And a lot of people are just basically saying, yeah, he's been good, but a quarterback's going to win the award. So first question for you, is that fair?
So is that fair? It can go so many different ways because you think about MVP, it's most valuable player. Now, to the Eagles, he is by far the most valuable player. Without him, I think this organization will have crumbled by now. I think Jalen Hurts and his head coach would have fought. I think the head coach, Sirianni, would have been fired, etc. I don't think the defense ever would have found a reason to play defense well because that was even up in the air. Vic Fangio would have fell apart like he normally does, coaching defense or whatever you want to call it. It could be a million storylines. So, yes, he is the most valuable player to his team. But then you look across the league and you're like, well, Josh Allen, I mean, how do you not have him number one right now? And then how do you not have Lamar or Patrick Mahomes with their lack of weapons or lack of injuries or other things there? It's just hard because the running back position doesn't touch the ball every single down. The quarterback every single time makes every single decision, every single play. Every single one. He can go to the line, it's a running play, he can call a passing play.
Right. Switch
He
it.
is just the most valuable position. It's unfortunate because running backs, if we look back like Christian McCaffrey last year, the scrimmage yards that he had, he was setting records. We look even further back to Cooper Kupp. One of the best wide receiver performances we've had, Tyreek Hill last year. Everybody makes a good argument at other utility positions. We don't even talk about defensive players. Let's like not even just disregard the running backs here. We're not even talking about edge guys. We're not even talking about cornerbacks. Except like Deron Bland set the record for most pick sixes. We didn't even look his way, even though that was very valuable to the Cowboys. And so, unfortunately, it is fair, but I hate saying it's fair because I love what these utility players, and that's the wrong word for them, are able to do with the quarterback leading the way.
Yeah, I just kind of think of it as like, of course we know that the quarterback position has been so heavily weighted and valued, right? And like when you pay a quarterback, you pay him stupid money, and then you're expecting him to overcome all your other team's deficiencies. So that's part of the gig. I just think like if you have a guy who was at one point a couple weeks ago within shouting distance of breaking running back all-time records, and he doesn't get considered for MVP, I think then there's something wrong with the system, right? And everybody's just like, well, that's cool. So like you could make. I'm not discounting Josh Allen's MVP case at all. Let me just clear that up before I say what I'm about to say. They have a competent running game finally in Buffalo. I'm sorry, that helps. Like, James Cook and Ray Davis doing stuff for him, that helps because what would they do before? They would heat him up, they would disregard their running game, and it, neutralize Josh at certain times. But it's the same thing with Lamar, right? Like, he's been able to grow and do this. They usually have a good defense, that always helps. It's just kind of like, it almost feels like we default to the best QB. And I just feel like that's it's like we don't do it in any other sport. That's the thing. Like, you think about basketball. Like, if you use the same logic as football, then the point guard should be the MVP every single year because the point guard touches the ball every single play, right? Or point forward, if you will, right? Yeah. But it's just kind of like, it makes me think that the MVP is just a flawed award. If the idea is just like just give it to the best QB, and then you start looking at like, all right, well maybe it's just offensive player of the year, right? Like and maybe that should be looked at as the same as MVP. And I just feel like as a result, like when you talk about players' accolades, right? When you talk about Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or whatever and everything they did, no one even really cares about MVPs. Like they'll care about Super Bowl MVPs, maybe, right? Because you're the best player in that game, right? But they don't care about MVPs like they do in the NBA or the MLB, for example. So I guess like, do you look at it as kind of like a flawed award? Do you care about MVP?
It's a great question. I mean, I care in the sense that I like the discourse that goes back and forth about it. I like how these sports are reality television shows at time when we're in this kind of realm. And so I think here's the problem. I think the game has just moved on from specifically football, I'm saying, not basketball, has moved on from there just being a one size fit all award. I think if
Right.
there was a best system, we just do here's an award for the best at every position.
Well,
Give a,
college does, right?
Exactly.
Like
Give a
that's yeah.
team on 22 guys, get an award, but it just wouldn't mean a much. It mean as much because in today's society and in our society, it's existed forever. We really care about one winner, champion of it all, the king or queen, whatever it is, and that's the same thing that we see in sports. That's why we love sports, is because we're rooting for one person to do something that we want for them. And we don't want it to be shared. We want it to be like, this is my Super Bowl, this is my team's MVP, etc. And so I just think the game has moved on from it because like you said, we used to have system quarterbacks back in the day, and I'm talking before the 2000s, just that guys that weren't doing what Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are doing today. So that was easier to be like, oh, we should give it to the best running back, or oh, this wide receiver's doing a really good job. But I agree. I just don't think it matters as much. I forget that Aaron Rodgers has a few, super MVPs, but I remember he has a Super Bowl. That's all that matters to me here. And I think it just matters a little bit more in other sports to people's accolades, but it's something that stirs people up a little bit. And maybe we just, remodel the system a little bit in terms of
I
what's
mean, if you
important.
did a by position award, right, and I think it's almost kind of like the pro football referencification of the way, like, how are people going to look at this in 10 to 15 years, right? Like, I'll use Miles Garrett as an example. Miles Garrett, over the past few years, has been one of the best edge rushers we've ever seen. Okay, the way his burst and everything is just insane, and you only know that because you watch him on Sundays, right? If there was an award, best edge rusher, and he won a couple of those, you could look in 20 years, somebody, writing a script for a video or something, or a podcast or whatever, is going to go and see, oh yeah, this guy won best edge rusher 2 times, so he must have been pretty good, And then the same way we look at guys from the 80s, right? Like, how do we measure greatness in the 80s from a non quarterback position? Just or a non-running back position back then, obviously when that was the most important position. So I just wonder, like I feel like the MVP is like super devalued. Maybe it's a half-baked idea, something that needs to be revisited. I think, but
100%. And I think it goes why they don't do all the other positions, like that kind of what we're talking about here. Let's just give everyone one award. It's because it's not as showy, not as flashy. Nobody wants to see what all five offensive linemen make. We don't want to even see the nose tackle award. We don't even want to see the free safety versus the strong safety
speak for
award.
yourself. I
We
want to see
no,
that nose tackle
we
award.
want to see it, but that's not going to get views. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
yeah, for sure,
the
for sure. Yeah,
MVP,
yeah.
we never are like, oh, this offensive lineman gave up 0 sacks this year. Why isn't he up for offensive
Right.
like MVP?
Yeah.
Because these guys, like you just said, Miles Garrett are doing great things that just go under the radar because of just how valued the quarterback is. So it's fair that the quarterback gets this much because they literally make or break a game. I mean, that's why we're talking about drafting quarterbacks.
Make or
at the
break a
beginning.
team, right? Make or break a season.
We're not
Make
like,
or break
hey,
a
this
coach.
this team is one nose tackle away from a Super Bowl. We're never gonna say that phrase. We're always gonna be saying we're not even gonna say the running back
You know
until
what they'll
the
say?
receiver.
It'll be like, man, they're like a piece away on defense. They won't
Exactly.
even say the position, right?
Exactly. So that's
yeah,
why the MVP award is unfortunately a quarterback award, even though I love Saquon and everything he's done this year.
for sure, for sure. So let's get back on track with the QBs. So I'm kind of curious. There's a lot of great talent out there. The Mahomes thing is interesting because I'll be honest, he hasn't been good this year. Like it's not to the level that we expect Mahomes. But with that in mind, we've talked about a few guys, Lamar or Josh Allen. Who are your five best QBs in the NFL right now?
It's a great question. I mean, obviously, I got to keep Mahomes at the top because, yeah, he's not doing his statistical best, but he's still making magic with what he
Still
has. I
winning,
think
yeah.
I think the league has really caught up to the system that's in place, and they don't have the right pieces on offense slash injuries slash an offensive line that's really banged up that has been rougher than we've seen in the past few years. And so Mahomes is still making magic with nothing right now. So he is still at the top until further notice. Right behind him, though, is Josh Allen. Josh Allen is having Mahomes type season. They're like reverse. Mahomes is making all these mistakes, a lot of interceptions, which aren't all on him, but he's getting sacked. You know, they're not putting it together, a lot of close games. But Josh Allen's no longer making mistakes, playing efficiently, dominating teams with his legs and through the air. And so Josh Allen's easily number two. When you go on from there, you could go so many different directions. I like
Lamar.
Lamar Jackson at number three. I think that's where I'm sitting in terms of a quarterback. I mean, you can't write off those legs on top of the arm as well talent that he's been able to develop over the years. So he's kind of at number three, but then four and five, you can name any of these names. You could go Burrow, Herbert, Stafford, I think is drastically underrated. You can even look at Jalen Hurts when they have Saquon Barkley, but that's when we start talking about MVP and who's more important. Those are kind of the guys that I have up there. I don't know if there's another name. I think
Where
there's
would you
two
put
quarterbacks.
Goff?
Ooh, off. He's in the top 10. I don't know where he falls in that top 10 because of all those other names would then take up those spots. And so he's a top 10 QB to me, but he's definitely not a top 5 QB, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, Herbert's interesting. He's been asked to do less this year, which is the opposite of what Burrow's had. He's been asked to do so much more. And I think even though they're losing games, Burrow has solidified where he's at. I think he's the four guy, right, after Lamar. And the five guy's interesting, right, because you mentioned all those guys. Like Purdy, when he's on, he's pretty good. Goff could be in that conversation, Herbert as well. So it's an interesting thing, but I feel like the top three are kind of, in whatever order you have them, are kind of solidified between Mahomes, Allen, and Jackson. And then you'd have Burrow in the four, and then it's kind of like pick your poison after that. Like there's guys putting up numbers, like Baker Mayfield's putting up numbers. It's just
And you could go to
it's
Jordan
interesting.
Love. You just speak about
Jordan
Goff
Love,
in the
yeah.
same division. I like to play the game of if this guy was on this team, would you think differently of it? If the
Mm,
Lions had Jordan Love, I think as a collective, we'd be like, oh, Detroit's going to win this thing based on what we've seen from Jordan Love and his upside. And that's not even to knock Jared Goff, but it goes back to that conversation. We know what Jared Goff is, and he can run that system perfectly. But imagine if Ben Johnson had Jordan Love. He would do a little bit more than we see now. We wouldn't be having Penei Sewell doing as much back there or like sending guys around in interesting plays. And so I hate to discredit Goff because I really like him as a player and a person. He seems like a great guy. But that's what I'm saying. That fifth spot, I think it's fully up for grabs. Any given day. Last year, if we talk about the playoffs, I'd give it to Jordan Love because of what he was able to bring that Packers team all the way down the line.
yeah, it's Love is how fortunate are you if you're a Packers fan, right? Like let's say like you're a little bit older than me, so I'm in my late 30s. Let's say you're a little bit older than me, and you grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. You got to see Brett Favre into Aaron Rodgers into Jordan Love, and I was just me. It's like as a Giants fan, I'm just like, man, we can't figure this shit out. And Packers have had three generations of elite quarterback play. I mean, that's just the way it looks. It's just he looks like one of those guys. And it's just fascinating, like how they've been able to scout QB talent over there in Green Bay. I brought up Jared Goff for a reason, though. I had an observation the other night on Thursday when they were playing the Packers, playing Jordan Love. When I watch Jared Goff do a play fake, I am mesmerized. Like, he is so good at play fakes. Like, he's not overly mobile. He's always had pretty decent arm talent. Accuracy's pretty good. But, like, because of their running game and how much of a threat it is, you have to have a QB who's really good at doing a play fake. And I was just like, man, it's kind of one of those traits that doesn't really get a lot of attention. They just like whatever you did a play fake. If the defense bit, awesome. But if you're really good at it, they'll bite more often, which you would think, and that's why the Lions do play action more than any other team, right? So, what are some traits that you think just in this modern era are just beyond important, like the most important traits that teams should look for when it comes to evaluating their QB?
So this is kind of one that I've been thinking about for a while, and I think it's underrated. Even though it's one that we talk about in the grand scheme, it's not a new idea, but it's one I don't think we put enough emphasis on because I totally agree with that, and it's kind of in the Goff mold. It's playing within the system of the said play going on. It's not leaning back on what your strength is. I get frustrated with Anthony Richardson in this, and it's not all on him. It's play calling, etc. But if we're running a mesh concept, we have guys going across the middle. We have some one deep out route, but there's then also an option for you to run. I don't want him thinking about running off the top. I also don't want him thinking about the big play. Take your wins, the 5-step drop, hit the mesh across the middle, and then just let your tight end get 4 or 5 yards. I just feel like the new quarterback coming in, everybody says, oh, they just play hero ball. Oh, they can use their legs. Oh, they're dual threat. But gone is the art of the Jared Goffs, where you just play within the rhythm of the game and you let the ball out within the rhythm of the play, not just the game. Goff's not sitting back there being like, I'm going to go to my hot. If he's throwing it out to the top route, or if it's down the line, he's throwing that no matter what the coverage is, unless it's like a too high safety over the top. If it's one-on-one, he already knows he's going to throw it. Anthony Richardson's, I'm again speculating, but just what I see is they don't fully process what the play is. Sometimes it's just a little fast for them, or they think they can fall back on something. So just finding that confidence within the play. I don't know if I described that right, but that's kind of where I'm at, as kind of those underrated intangibles.
Yeah, so I feel like it used to be when it was like exclusively in the pocket, right? The whole setup would be, I'll use Peyton Manning as an example because he was excellent at this. Go walk up to the line, you look at what the defense is showing you, you make your call outs, whatever. Then you know that if they decide to blitz down the middle with the mic, then you could go out hot to your running back, or if they drop back in coverage and you know, okay, what does this coverage look like? Then I go progression, make a decision. What's happening now as these QBs, I think, are taking more snaps out of the shotgun as they're coming up, not even just in the NFL, like in high school, in their camps, in college. You're like, bad example, but when, like, I play that EA Sports college football game all the time, right? And you'll play like a pro style playbook, quote unquote, and it's like 80% shotgun. That's just the college game. Everything is shotgun, shotgun and pistol. And it's just kind of like they don't really get the exact mechanics right. And because they're usually now these tremendous athletes, it's kind of like drop back, one read, run, right? It's either you throw the first guy or you run, right? And I think that's the Anthony Richardson model. And that's in his early part of his career, that was a Lamar Jackson model. Now he's of course gone more to that Peyton Manning model where he's like, snap, look, come back, nothing there, now I run. Lamar has just unique acceleration and speed that he could do that. Not all, like a Bryce Young isn't afforded the luxuries that Lamar Jackson is afforded from the terms of physical skill and offensive line play that he has around him. I think I actually Tua does a good job of that in terms of reading the defense and kind of going through his progressions. His problem is, of course, just the injuries. The head injuries make you concerned.
And he's a little
Jared
bit
Goff
too far on that scale. Like he's like, it's out of my hands within a second and a half, which is good, and that's how the scheme is there. But that's like so far on the other end of it. Like I think it's funny. We look at prospects like Richardson and stuff, and we always say they can play out of the system. They can make things happen. And sometimes that's actually a downside. Like I want someone that's so efficient in a system. Guess who is super efficient in their system in college? Bo Nix. That's why he got drafted where he was. Can we just hit the intermediate routes? Can we just hit the checkdowns? Can we just take what the offense is getting? Every pass play doesn't need to be 15 yards. It can be a 4-yard gain, just like a run play. And look at us, 2nd and 6, and we're feeling a little bit better instead of an air out.
Well, that's like another thing too with defenses this year. They're kind of going to this too high safety look, and so now you're saying, I'm taking away the deep ball. What are you gonna do? So if you're a guy like Richardson, your whole thing is the deep ball. Right, it's just like if you can't hit that little drag route, you can't hit that quick in, that quick curl or hitch on the outside, or a quick out. You're just gonna be, in a world of trouble because they're just saying, hey, if you're gonna score on us, it's gonna be long, sustained drives, and you're gonna have to be pinpoint accurate, right? And that's the shift. I think so. For me, when I look at the traits that matter the most, patience in the pocket is a huge one. Like Jordan Love is really good at that, I find. Like, that's another thing. I don't know if you're like this, Griff, like, that we kind of like commentate on this a lot now. So you kind of watch games differently, you
Yeah.
know? So, like, I'm watching Jordan Love, and I was like, man, he's really kind of like maneuvering and in the pocket, understanding when is the last possible second he could throw the ball. It doesn't work all the times, but for the most part, he has a good feel for it. So, feel in the pocket, I think, is huge. You got to have some mobility, right? You have to be able to, if you're crashing out, to be able to step into the pocket and get 5 yards and slide down real quick, right? And then the last thing is accuracy. Like, I think you have to be able to throw a deep ball as well, but I think accuracy, some ways, is a little bit more important. Like, a good example of this, a guy who carved himself a nice little career without having much of a deep ball, is Teddy Bridgewater, right? Like, he was an accurate QB at college at Louisville. He translated that into a decent NFL career. Obviously, he wasn't a superstar or anything like that, but he was a good pro who made good decisions, had a lot of opportunities to start a lot of games. I think that's where a guy like Geno Smith struggles, for example, is that, a lot of times he just misses on these like short swing passes to the running back or whatever. That's what separates guys who win a lot in this league from just okay guys, right?
100%.
And so to me, that's kind of the overall thing, and it's interesting to think about because it completely flipped from what it was back in like the '90s. In the '90s, we're running go routes and nothing else, deep post and go route. That's it, right? And then relying on the running game for the short to intermediate stuff, maybe a little bit in the screen action. But now with like these bubble screens and quick hitches, quick in routes, slant routes, it becomes that accuracy piece is just so much more important. Accuracy and feel in the pocket are so much more important, especially too as these defensive ends are just like, they're not the defensive ends that we grew up, where I grew up with, I should say, because like those guys are kind of big lumbering dudes, and like you think about somebody like Dwight Freeney, who is kind of considered like the super athletic guy in his time. He's nothing compared to these other guys. This Myles Garrett, type situation. Even like a guy for the Giants who hasn't really popped yet, but like just from an athleticism saying, the Kayvon Thibodeau, right? Like that kind of thing. Aiden Hutchinson in Detroit. Like these guys are just like, they're slimmer, more agile, quicker off the block. And I think there's a big deficiency in offensive line play across the league right now. So now these QBs got to think even faster than they did before.
Exactly. And you even said a funny thing. You were like, the Giants could just be safe and take an offensive lineman. That's not always a safe pick, unfortunately.
Not even safe anymore, right? Yeah,
and especially with the Giants. I mean, Evan Neal. When are we going to see a pop there on that side, And so if I'm a quarterback right now, and the Lions and Jared Goff is a perfect example. You look at their best wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's not your barn burner down the field. They have Jameson Williams for that. But they use Jameson Williams as kind of a jet sweep guy, more like an Xavier Worthy type, and then they take a shot or two, just a shot or two though, down the field, and they just work on curl routes. They get the intermediate routes. They get the slants across the middle. That's what teams need to do with quarterbacks that are brand new, like a Richardson, or if you're looking for like a Russell Wilson resurgence, that's what they're doing. They're establishing the run, and then they're just hitting the intermediate routes and then taking one or two shots down the field. That's kind of the way to win in today's NFL at a quarterback level.
Yeah, I think with defenses too, they're kind of looking at like, look, we want to do everything but the deep play, right? Like we don't want to see Tyreek Hill giving us the peace sign as he's darting up the sideline, right? And that's just kind of like, because giving up a 15-yard in route isn't going to make Sports Center. Giving up a 50-yard fly route is. So, like,
and percentages.
I feel like, it's percentages.
You're just playing
too,
percentages. Yeah. You'd rather them have more plays than less plays. There's going to be more times that there's a mistake or not.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Griff, man, this has been an awesome chat with you, which I fully expected because I know what I'm getting into. So, as always, thank you for popping on. Let the good people know where they could check out your show and follow you and all that good stuff.
Totally, Omar. I really appreciate you having me on. Definitely got to have you back on. For everybody that doesn't know, Show About Sports, that is the name of the show. Make sure to type in with Griffin Prock just so you find me a little bit easier. Because as I was saying at the top, the SEO, a lot of show about sports pop up when you search that. And then yeah, at Griffin underscore Proc on Threads. That's where I'm talking all my hot takes. I'm chatting with Omar every day on there, just about everything that's coming up. I break news sometimes if I can see when Adam Scheffner is doing a thing or two, but
There you
mostly
go.
just giving my takes and recaps on stuff. So again, Omar, thanks for having me on, man.
Hey, real quick, have you jumped on the whole Blue Sky bandwagon or no?
No, I have
Not
not.
yet. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just kind of a lot of people ask me like why don't I have a YouTube channel? And I just started doing Reels and I didn't have a Twitter before, or an X as you would call it now. I think it's a lost art to try just one thing and get really good at that
Get
one
the one
thing
thing.
and be in
Yeah.
that top percent of that one thing. If you, because audience is everywhere, but it's like if you're selling to everybody, you're selling to no one. So I'm just trying to sell to one group, and I'm not even selling, just my ideas
Right,
on
right,
there.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's
Just
why
throwing shit out there.
I'm not on Blue Sky, so you can't find me. You might find a fake account of mine, but I've never been on the app.
Yeah, I kind of took this approach with writing myself. For a while, I was doing Medium and I was doing Substack. And I was just cross posting to both, and I was just like, it's just exhausting to try and figure out things that change with one over the other. So I was like, well, Medium was paying me more, so I'll just go ahead and get Medium. Stick with Medium. You
Totally.
know what I mean? So but yeah, so thanks again, Griff. Make sure to follow him on Threads. Make sure to follow him on Instagram and check out Show About Sports. We'll have that linked in the description. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. I like it because YouTube allows you to just have the audio version only now, which is awesome. So check out the podcast. Check out Griff's podcast. Again, that'll be in the show notes. Griff, thanks again. We'll catch everybody next week for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast.